This is Mental Forge, where weakness burns and warriors are built. There was a moment when Thomas Edison stood in his laboratory, surrounded by the remnants of his 900th failed attempt at creating the incandescent light bulb. His assistants had long since given up hope, whispering among themselves that perhaps this dream was impossible. The smell of burnt filaments filled the air, and financial ruin loomed like a shadow over his workshop. But Edison did something that separated him from every other inventor of his time. He looked at that failure not as evidence that he should quit, but as proof that he was one step closer to success. He had developed a habit that most people never master, the ability to break the habit of giving up. What if I told you that the single most powerful force determining your destiny right now is not your circumstances, not your education, not even your natural talents, but the collection of habits that govern your daily life? What if the difference between the life you're living and the life you dream of living comes down to one fundamental skill: your ability to force yourself to break the bad habits that are silently sabotaging your future? Today, we're going to embark on a journey that will fundamentally transform how you think about habit formation and habit destruction. We're going to explore the hidden mechanisms that keep you trapped in cycles of behavior that you know are not serving you. And more importantly, we're going to give you the exact blueprint for breaking free from these invisible chains once and for all. The promise I'm making to you is this: by the end of our time together, you will possess a complete system for identifying, understanding, and systematically destroying any habit that stands between you and your highest potential. You will learn to harness the same psychological principles that allowed history's greatest achievers to transform themselves from ordinary individuals into legends. You will discover how to rewire your subconscious mind, rebuild your identity, and create an unstoppable momentum toward the person you were meant to become. But first, let me share with you a truth that most people never realize. The habits you struggle to break are not random. They are not accidents. They are sophisticated survival mechanisms that your subconscious mind has developed to protect you from what it perceives as danger. Your procrastination habit exists because at some point, your mind learned that avoiding action felt safer than risking failure. Your habit of negative thinking developed because your brain decided that expecting the worst would protect you from disappointment. Your habit of staying in your comfort zone emerged because your nervous system concluded that familiar pain was preferable to unknown possibilities. This is why willpower alone will never be enough to break your bad habits. You are not fighting against random behaviors. You are fighting against your own survival instincts. You are battling a part of your mind that believes these habits are keeping you alive. This is why Napoleon Hill wrote in Think and Grow Rich that the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between a real experience and one that is vividly imagined. Your habits feel real to your subconscious because they have been practiced so many times that they have become your identity. But here's where the power lies. If your habits were created by repetition, they can be destroyed by repetition. If they were formed by mental rehearsal, they can be reformed by mental rehearsal. If they became part of your identity through consistent action, they can be removed from your identity through consistent opposite action. The same force that built your prison can build your palace. James Clear, in his revolutionary work Atomic Habits, revealed that we do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. Your habits are your systems. Change your habits, and you change your life. But to change your habits, you must first understand what they really are and why they exist. Every habit follows what psychologists call the habit loop. Cue, routine, reward. The cue is the trigger that initiates the behavior. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is the benefit your brain receives from completing the behavior. Your brain creates habits because they are energy efficient. Rather than having to consciously decide how to respond to every situation, your brain can run an automatic program that has worked before. The challenge is that your brain doesn't distinguish between good habits and bad habits. It simply reinforces whatever behavior you repeat most consistently. If you consistently respond to stress by eating junk food, your brain will make junk food eating your automatic stress response. If you consistently respond to boredom by scrolling social media, your brain will make social media scrolling your automatic boredom response. If you consistently respond to challenges by procrastinating, your brain will make procrastination your automatic challenge response. But here's the key insight that will change everything for you. You can hijack this same system to install empowering habits just as easily as you install disempowering ones. The process is identical. The only difference is the content. Let me tell you about a man who understood this principle better than almost anyone in history. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and he was simultaneously the most powerful man in the world and one of history's greatest philosophers. As the Roman emperor, he had access to every pleasure and indulgence imaginable. He could have developed habits of luxury, excess, and self-indulgence without any external consequences. Instead, he developed habits of discipline, wisdom, and virtue that sustained him through some of the most challenging periods in Roman history. How did he do it? Through a practice he called morning reflection and evening review. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius would remind himself of his principles and his purpose. He would visualize the challenges he might face that day and mentally rehearse responding to them with wisdom and strength. Every evening, he would review his actions and thoughts, celebrating his victories and learning from his mistakes. He was systematically programming his mind to default to excellence rather than mediocrity. The meditations that Marcus Aurelius wrote were never intended for publication. They were his private journal, his tool for habit transformation. In those pages, you can see him literally rewiring his thought patterns in real time. He writes to himself, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." This wasn't just philosophy. This was habit engineering. Marcus Aurelius was installing a habit of responding to difficult people with understanding rather than anger. He was replacing his natural habit of frustration with a trained habit of compassion. He was forcing himself to break the bad habit of letting other people's behavior determine his emotional state. This is the first fundamental principle of habit transformation. You must become conscious of your unconscious patterns. Most people live their entire lives as passengers in their own minds, completely unaware of the automatic programs that are running their behavior. They wonder why they keep getting the same results, while never examining the habitual thoughts and actions that create those results. The process of becoming conscious begins with what I call the awareness audit. For the next 7 days, I want you to carry a small notebook or use your phone to track your habits in real time. Every time you catch yourself engaging in a habit you want to change, write down 3 things: what triggered the habit, what the habit was, and what reward you received from it. For example, if you have a habit of checking social media compulsively, you might write, trigger, felt bored during work. Habit, opened Instagram and scrolled for 20 minutes. Reward, temporary entertainment and distraction from work stress. The key is to observe without judgment. You are not trying to change anything yet. You are simply gathering intelligence about your own behavioral patterns. This awareness practice alone will begin to weaken your bad habits. Consciousness is the enemy of unconscious behavior. The moment you shine the light of awareness on an automatic pattern, it begins to lose its power over you. You move from being a victim of your habits to being an observer of your habits. And once you become an observer, you can become a designer. But awareness alone is not enough. You must also understand the deeper psychology of why your habits exist. Every bad habit is serving a positive intention. Your procrastination is trying to protect you from the pain of failure or judgment. Your overeating is trying to provide comfort during times of stress or loneliness. Your negative thinking is trying to prepare you for disappointment and keep you safe from taking risks. The mistake most people make is trying to eliminate the habit without honoring the positive intention behind it. This creates internal conflict. Part of you wants to change, but another part of you resists the change because it believes the habit is necessary for your survival. You end up in a war with yourself, and in wars with ourselves, we rarely win. The solution is what I call habit substitution rather than habit elimination. Instead of trying to remove a bad habit, you replace it with a good habit that serves the same positive intention. If you procrastinate because you fear failure, you don't try to stop procrastinating. Instead, you develop a habit of taking small, low-risk actions that build your confidence and competence over time. If you overeat because you need comfort, You don't try to stop eating. Instead, you develop alternative comfort habits like listening to music, calling a friend, or taking a warm bath. This brings us to one of the most powerful examples of habit substitution in history. Abraham Lincoln struggled with what we would now call clinical depression. He had developed habits of negative thinking and self-criticism that nearly drove him to suicide as a young man. His friends once had to remove all sharp objects from his room because they feared he might harm himself. But Lincoln didn't overcome his depression by trying to stop thinking negative thoughts. Instead, he developed a habit of telling stories and jokes. Whenever he felt the darkness creeping in, he would gather people around him and tell humorous anecdotes. This served the same function as his negative thinking. It gave him a way to process difficult emotions, but it had the opposite effect on his mental state and his relationships. Lincoln's storytelling habit became so strong that even during the Civil War, when the weight of the nation rested on his shoulders, he would interrupt serious cabinet meetings to tell a funny story. His advisors sometimes found this frustrating, but Lincoln understood something they didn't. His humor habit wasn't a distraction from his leadership responsibilities. It was what made his leadership possible. It was how he processed stress, connected with people, and maintained his mental health during the most challenging period in American history. This is the second fundamental principle of habit transformation. Replacement is more powerful than resistance. When you try to resist a habit, you give it energy and attention, which actually strengthens it. When you replace a habit, you redirect that energy towards something beneficial. But to successfully replace a habit, you must engineer your environment to support the new behavior and discourage the old one. Your environment is constantly shaping your habits, usually without your awareness. The foods in your kitchen determine your eating habits. The apps on your phone determine your digital habits. The people you spend time with determine your social habits. The books on your nightstand determine your learning habits. James Clear calls this designing for laziness. Make the habits you want easier to do than the habits you don't want. If you want to exercise more, lay out your workout clothes the night before. If you want to eat healthier, put fruits and vegetables at eye level in your refrigerator and hide the junk food in the back. If you want to read more, put books in every room of your house and remove the batteries from your TV remote. One of the most brilliant examples of environmental design comes from the life of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin wanted to develop 13 different virtues, including temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. Rather than trying to develop all 13 virtues simultaneously, which would have been overwhelming, Franklin focused on one virtue per week. But the genius was in how he tracked his progress. Franklin created a small booklet with 13 pages, one for each virtue. Each page had 7 columns, one for each day of the week. Every evening, Franklin would put a dot next to any virtue he had violated that day. His goal was to have pages with no dots. He made his progress visible and concrete, which strengthened his motivation to continue. Franklin later wrote that while he never achieved perfection in all 13 virtues, the attempt made him a happier and more successful person. He had discovered what modern psychology now calls the power of habit stacking, linking new habits to existing routines, and habit tracking, making progress visible and measurable. This brings us to the third fundamental principle of habit transformation. Measurement creates momentum. What gets measured gets managed. When you track your habits, you create accountability, awareness, and motivation. You transform abstract intentions into concrete data. But the most powerful force in habit transformation is not external tracking. It's internal identity shift. Your habits are ultimately an expression of who you believe you are. If you believe you are someone who lacks discipline, you will struggle to maintain disciplined habits. If you believe you are someone who always gives up, you will find reasons to quit when things get difficult. If you believe you are someone who is unlucky or unworthy, you will unconsciously sabotage your own success. This is why Tony Robbins says that the strongest force in human psychology is the need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves. Your identity is like a thermostat that regulates your behavior. When your actions move too far away from your identity, internal tension is created, and you unconsciously adjust your behavior to restore consistency. Most people try to change their habits while maintaining their old identity, which creates enormous internal resistance. They say things like, "I'm trying to eat healthier," or "I'm trying to exercise more." The word trying reveals that they haven't shifted their identity. They still see themselves as someone who doesn't eat healthy or exercise regularly. They're just temporarily attempting different behavior. The breakthrough comes when you shift from outcome-based habits to identity-based habits. Instead of saying, "I want to lose 20 pounds," you say, "I am someone who takes care of their body." Instead of saying, "I want to write a book," you say, "I am a writer." Instead of saying, "I want to be more disciplined," you say, "I am a disciplined person." This identity shift approach was mastered by one of history's greatest inventors and entrepreneurs, Nikola Tesla. Tesla didn't see himself as someone who was trying to invent things. He saw himself as an inventor. This identity was so strong that he would mentally construct and test his inventions in his mind before ever building physical prototypes. He would run these mental machines for weeks, occasionally checking them for wear and tear, and only build physical versions when he was satisfied with their mental performance. Tesla's identity as an inventor shaped every aspect of his daily habits. He would walk exactly 10 miles every day, not for exercise, but because he believed physical movement stimulated his mental creativity. He would eat alone in restaurants because he believed social interaction during meals interfered with his digestion and thus his mental clarity. He would visualize his inventions in vivid detail every night before sleep because he believed his subconscious mind would continue working on the problems while he rested. These weren't random quirks, they were identity-based habits. Tesla had decided he was an inventor, and then he asked himself, what daily habits would an inventor have? He then engineered his entire lifestyle around supporting his inventive capacity. This is the fourth fundamental principle of habit transformation. Identity drives behavior more powerfully than willpower. When you shift your identity, your habits naturally align with who you believe you are. But how do you actually shift your identity? Through a process I call evidence accumulation. Your identity is formed by the evidence you have about who you are. This evidence comes from your past actions. Every time you act in a certain way, you cast a vote for the type of person you are. Every time you choose the healthy meal, you vote for being a healthy person. Every time you choose to work on your goals, instead of watching television, you vote for being a disciplined person. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you vote for being a courageous person. The beautiful thing about this voting system is that you don't need a majority to start changing your identity. You just need to start winning more votes than you're losing. If you meditate for 10 minutes today, you have evidence that you are someone who meditates. If you write for 30 minutes today, you have evidence that you are a writer. If you exercise for 20 minutes today, you have evidence that you are someone who takes care of their body. Each positive action becomes proof of your new identity. As the evidence accumulates, your self-concept shifts. As your self-concept shifts, your habits become easier to maintain because they're no longer fighting against your identity, they're expressing your identity. This process is accelerated by what Napoleon Hill called auto-suggestion, the practice of deliberately programming your subconscious mind through repetitive self-talk. Hill discovered that the subconscious mind accepts and acts upon any thought that is repeated with emotion and conviction, whether that thought is true or false, positive or negative. Most people are unconsciously practicing negative auto-suggestion all day long. They tell themselves, "I'm so lazy. I have no self-control. I always mess things up. I'm not good with money. I can't stick to anything." These statements become their reality because the subconscious mind accepts them as instructions. But you can consciously practice positive auto-suggestion to install empowering beliefs about yourself. Every morning, you can look in the mirror and say with conviction, "I am disciplined. I am focused. I am someone who follows through on their commitments. I am someone who chooses long-term rewards over short-term pleasures. I am becoming the person I was meant to be." The key is to make these affirmations feel real by connecting them to evidence. After you say, "I am disciplined," remind yourself of a recent example of your discipline. After you say, "I am focused," recall a time when you maintained concentration despite distractions. After you say, "I am someone who follows through," remember a commitment you recently kept. This evidence-based affirmation practice was used by one of history's most successful industrialists, Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie immigrated to America as a poor Scottish boy. and eventually became one of the wealthiest men in the world. But his success wasn't due to luck or natural talent. It was due to his systematic approach to self-development. Every morning, Carnegie would spend time visualizing himself as the successful businessman he wanted to become. He would see himself making important decisions, leading meetings, and creating value for others. He would feel the emotions of success, pride, and accomplishment. He would tell himself that he was destined for greatness and that every challenge was an opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities. But Carnegie didn't just practice positive thinking. He also practiced positive doing. He would identify the habits and behaviors of successful businessmen and deliberately adopt them. He studied how they dressed, how they spoke, how they treated employees, how they made decisions, and how they managed their time. He literally studied success like a science and then implemented what he learned. Carnegie understood that you cannot think your way into a new identity. You must act your way into a new identity. Thoughts alone are not enough. You need aligned action to create genuine belief. This is why he said, "The man who acquires the ability to take full possession of his own mind may take possession of anything else to which he is justly entitled." This brings us to the fifth fundamental principle of habit transformation. You must act your way into your new identity, not think your way into it. The fastest way to change what you believe about yourself is to change what you do consistently. But consistency is where most people struggle. They start strong, maintain their new habits for a few days or weeks, and then gradually drift back to their old patterns. This happens because they haven't learned to navigate the inevitable challenges that arise during habit transformation. The first challenge is what I call the honeymoon phase crash. When you start a new habit, you're motivated and excited. The habit feels fresh and meaningful. But after a few weeks, the novelty wears off. The habit starts to feel boring or difficult. Your initial motivation fades, and you rely more heavily on discipline and systems. This is normal and expected. Motivation gets you started, but systems keep you going. The key is to design your habit system to be sustainable, even when motivation is low. This means making your habits as easy and automatic as possible. Jeff Olson, in The Slight Edge, explains that success is not about massive actions taken occasionally. It's about small actions taken consistently over time. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people is not that successful people take dramatically different actions. It's that they consistently take slightly better actions, and these small differences compound over time into dramatically different results. Olson uses the example of reading 10 pages of a good book every day versus watching television for 30 minutes every day. On any given day, the difference seems insignificant. The person who watches television isn't noticeably worse off, and the person who reads isn't noticeably better off. But over the course of a year, one person has read 12 books and expanded their knowledge and perspective, while the other person has consumed over 100 hours of mostly meaningless entertainment. This is the power of the compound effect applied to habits. Small habits, practiced consistently, create extraordinary results over time. But small negative habits, practiced consistently, create extraordinary problems over time. The second challenge is what I call the plateau of latent potential. This is the period when you're practicing your new habits consistently, but you're not yet seeing dramatic results. Your external circumstances haven't changed much, but important internal changes are occurring that aren't yet visible. James Clear compares this to ice melting. When you heat ice from 25 degrees to 31 degrees, nothing seems to happen. The ice looks exactly the same, but you're not wasting energy. You're accumulating the potential for transformation. When you heat the ice from 31 degrees to 32 degrees, it melts. The breakthrough seems sudden, but it was actually the result of all the previous heating. Habit transformation works the same way. You might practice your new habits for weeks or months without seeing dramatic external changes. But internal changes are occurring. Neural pathways are being strengthened. Identity shifts are happening gradually. Confidence is building slowly. Then, seemingly overnight, you break through to a new level of performance and results. The key is to trust the process during the plateau. This is where most people quit, right before their breakthrough would have occurred. They don't realize they're in the accumulation phase of the compound effect. This patience and persistence were demonstrated brilliantly by Thomas Edison during his invention of the incandescent light bulb. Edison didn't succeed after a few attempts. He conducted over 1,000 experiments with different materials and designs. Most of these experiments failed completely. His laboratory was filled with the evidence of failure after failure. But Edison had developed a habit of reframing failure. He didn't see failed experiments as proof that he was wasting his time. He saw them as proof that he was gathering valuable information about what doesn't work. He famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This reframing habit allowed Edison to maintain motivation and momentum even during long periods without visible progress. He understood that invention is a process of elimination. Every failed experiment eliminated one possibility and brought him closer to the solution. He was playing a long-term game, while most people were playing a short-term game. Edison also developed supporting habits that sustained his persistence. He would take short naps throughout the day to maintain his mental clarity. He would hold a steel ball in his hand while napping so that when he relaxed, the ball would drop and wake him up before he entered deep sleep. He would immediately write down any ideas that came to him during these brief rest periods. These weren't random quirks. They were systematically designed habits that supported his primary goal of sustained innovation. Edison understood that breakthrough results require sustained effort, and sustained effort requires systematic habit design. This is the sixth fundamental principle of habit transformation. You must design supporting habits that sustain your primary habits. Success is not about one perfect habit. It's about a system of interconnected habits that reinforce each other. For example, if your primary habit is exercising every morning, your supporting habits might include laying out your workout clothes the night before, going to bed early enough to get adequate sleep, preparing a pre-workout snack, and scheduling your workouts at the same time each day. Each supporting habit makes your primary habit easier and more automatic. But even with perfect systems, you will occasionally face what I call habit disruption events, situations that make your normal routine impossible. You might get sick, travel unexpectedly, face a family emergency, or deal with unusual work demands. These disruptions are not failures. They are tests of your habit resilience. The key is to have what I call minimum viable habits, reduced versions of your full habits that you can maintain even during challenging circumstances. If your normal exercise habit is a 60-minute workout, your minimum viable version might be 10 push-ups and a 5-minute walk. If your normal reading habit is 30 minutes, your minimum viable version might be reading 1 page. The goal is not to maintain peak performance during disruptions. The goal is to maintain the habit, identity, and momentum. When you do your minimum viable habit during challenging times, you prove to yourself that you are still the type of person who exercises, reads, meditates, or whatever the habit is. You maintain the neural pathway and prevent the habit from completely dissolving. This approach was mastered by Winston Churchill during World War II. Churchill had developed powerful daily habits around writing, reading, painting, and strategic thinking. But the demands of wartime leadership meant that his normal routine was constantly disrupted. Rather than abandoning his habits entirely, Churchill adapted them to fit his circumstances. When he couldn't spend hours writing, he would dictate letters and speeches while walking. When he couldn't read for extended periods, he would read during brief moments between meetings. When he couldn't paint landscapes outdoors, he would paint still lifes in his office. He maintained the essence of his habits even when he couldn't maintain their normal form. This flexibility allowed Churchill to sustain his creativity, mental clarity, and emotional resilience during one of the most stressful periods in human history. His habits weren't just personal preferences, they were the foundation of his leadership capacity. By maintaining his habits in adapted forms, he maintained his ability to think clearly and lead effectively. This is the seventh fundamental principle of habit transformation. Flexibility prevents abandonment. Rigid adherence to specific routines will eventually break under real-world pressures. Flexible adherence to habit identities can survive any disruption. But what about the deeper psychological forces that resist habit change? Even with perfect systems and flexible approaches, you will encounter internal resistance. This resistance comes from what Steven Pressfield calls the resistance in his powerful book, The War of Art. The resistance is the voice in your head that tells you to skip your workout, to procrastinate on your important project, to stay in your comfort zone, to give up on your dreams. The resistance is not random. It's a sophisticated survival mechanism that your subconscious mind uses to keep you safe from perceived threats. Your subconscious mind perceives change as dangerous because change involves uncertainty, and uncertainty feels threatening to a brain that evolved to keep you alive in a dangerous world. This is why your resistance gets stronger as you attempt more significant changes. The bigger the change, the more threatening it feels to your subconscious, and the stronger the resistance becomes. This is why people often self-sabotage just as they're about to achieve breakthrough results. The resistance is fighting hardest to keep you in your familiar patterns. But Pressfield discovered something crucial. The resistance is actually a compass pointing toward your highest growth. The activities that generate the most resistance are usually the activities that would create the most positive transformation in your life. Your resistance is not trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect the current version of you from being replaced by a better version. Understanding this allows you to reframe resistance from an enemy to be defeated into valuable information to be utilized. When you feel strong resistance to a particular habit or action, you can ask yourself, what is this resistance trying to protect me from? What growth opportunity am I avoiding? What fear is this resistance revealing? Often, you'll discover that your resistance is protecting you from the risk of failure, judgment, or success. Yes, fear of success is just as common as fear of failure. Success means responsibility, visibility, and higher expectations. Some part of you might prefer the familiar pain of mediocrity to the unknown challenges of excellence. One of history's greatest examples of overcoming resistance comes from the life of Abraham Lincoln during his presidency. Lincoln faced enormous resistance, both external and internal, to his decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Externally, he faced political pressure from his own party, military leaders who threatened resignation, and border states who threatened secession. But the internal resistance was even more challenging. Lincoln had to overcome his own doubts about whether he had the constitutional authority to free the slaves, whether the timing was right, whether the action would help or hurt the Union cause, and whether he personally was the right person to make such a momentous decision. Lincoln worked through this resistance by developing a habit of deep reflection and consultation. He would spend hours alone in his office, walking back and forth, thinking through all the implications of his decision. He would seek counsel from advisors, but ultimately trust his own judgment. He would write out his thoughts to clarify his thinking. He would pray for guidance and wisdom. But most importantly, Lincoln developed a habit of connecting his decisions to his deepest values and highest purpose. He didn't make the decision to free the slaves based on political calculations or personal preferences. He made it because he believed it was morally right and aligned with his vision of what America could become. This connection to higher purpose gave Lincoln the strength to act despite enormous resistance. When your habits and actions are connected to something larger than your immediate comfort or convenience, you develop what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, motivation that comes from within rather than from external rewards or punishments. Intrinsic motivation is far more sustainable than extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation depends on external circumstances remaining favorable. Intrinsic motivation draws its power from your internal values and vision, which remain constant regardless of external circumstances. This brings us to the eighth fundamental principle of habit transformation. Connect your habits to your deeper purpose and values. When your daily actions express your highest values, they become sacred practices rather than burdensome obligations. But how do you discover your deeper purpose and values? Through a process of honest self-examination and reflection. Most people live their entire lives without ever clearly defining what they truly value or what they want their life to represent. They adopt the values of their family, culture, or peer group without questioning whether these values align with their authentic self. To discover your authentic values, ask yourself these questions. When do you feel most alive and energized? What activities make you lose track of time? What achievements are you most proud of? What would you regret not doing if you knew you only had 1 year to live? What legacy do you want to leave? What would you attempt if you knew you could not fail? Your answers to these questions will reveal your authentic values and natural motivations. Once you know what truly matters to you, you can design habits that express and reinforce these values. Your habit transformation journey becomes a path of self-actualization rather than self-improvement. This value-based approach to habit formation was brilliantly demonstrated by Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi didn't develop his powerful daily habits because he read about them in a self-help book. He developed them because they were expressions of his deepest values of truth, nonviolence, simplicity, and service. Gandhi's habit of spinning cotton every day wasn't just about producing cloth. It was a daily reminder of his commitment to Indian independence and self-sufficiency. His habit of fasting wasn't just about physical health. It was a spiritual practice that connected him to his values of self-discipline and sacrifice for others. His habit of walking everywhere wasn't just about exercise. It was an expression of his value of simplicity and his rejection of unnecessary luxury. Because Gandhi's habits were expressions of his values, they felt meaningful rather than burdensome. He wasn't forcing himself to maintain disciplines that contradicted his nature. He was expressing his nature through disciplined action. This alignment between values and actions created enormous internal consistency and power. Gandhi's value-aligned habits also made him incredibly resilient. When external circumstances became difficult, when he was imprisoned, threatened, or attacked, his habits remained constant because they weren't dependent on external conditions. They were expressions of who he was, not responses to what was happening around him. This value alignment is crucial for long-term habit sustainability. Habits that are aligned with your values feel authentic and energizing. Habits that contradict your values feel forced and draining. If you're struggling to maintain a particular habit, ask yourself whether it truly aligns with your authentic values or whether you're trying to adopt someone else's definition of success. Now let me share with you the most powerful technique for installing new habits and breaking old ones, the process I call deep rehearsal. This technique combines visualization, emotional conditioning, and mental repetition to program your subconscious mind for automatic success. Deep rehearsal works because your subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real experience. When you repeatedly visualize yourself performing a new habit with complete sensory detail and positive emotion, you create neural pathways that make the actual behavior feel familiar and natural when you perform it in reality. Here's how to practice deep rehearsal. Every night before sleep, when your mind is naturally more receptive to suggestion, spend 10 to 15 minutes visualizing yourself, performing your desired habit perfectly. See yourself through your own eyes, not as an outside observer. Make the visualization as detailed and realistic as possible. If your desired habit is exercising every morning, see yourself waking up energized and motivated. Feel yourself putting on your workout clothes with excitement. See yourself walking to your exercise area with confidence. Feel the satisfaction of completing your workout. Experience the pride and accomplishment of following through on your commitment. See how this success carries into the rest of your day, making you feel more confident and capable in all areas. The key is to make the visualization emotionally compelling. Your subconscious mind is motivated more by emotion than by logic. When you can genuinely feel excited, proud, and satisfied about your new habit during visualization, you create emotional associations that draw you toward the behavior in real life. But don't just visualize success. Also visualize overcoming obstacles and challenges. See yourself maintaining your habit even when you don't feel motivated. Visualize yourself getting back on track immediately after missing a day. See yourself adapting your habit to different circumstances and environments. This mental rehearsal prepares you for real-world challenges and builds confidence in your ability to persist. This visualization technique was used masterfully by one of history's greatest military strategists, Alexander the Great. Before every battle, Alexander would spend hours visualizing the upcoming conflict in vivid detail. He would see himself and his troops moving across the battlefield, anticipate enemy tactics, and mentally rehearse his responses to various scenarios. But Alexander didn't just visualize military tactics. He visualized himself embodying the qualities of leadership, courage, and inspiration that would motivate his troops to follow him into seemingly impossible situations. He would see himself remaining calm under pressure, making brilliant decisions in chaotic moments, and inspiring confidence in others, even when facing overwhelming odds. This mental rehearsal allowed Alexander to perform with seemingly supernatural confidence and clarity during actual battles. He had already fought and won each battle hundreds of times in his mind before ever setting foot on the physical battlefield. His subconscious mind had been programmed for success through repeated mental practice. Alexander's approach demonstrates the ninth fundamental principle of habit transformation. Mental rehearsal accelerates physical mastery. When you practice your habits mentally with vivid detail and positive emotion, you program your subconscious mind for automatic success. But mental rehearsal must be combined with physical practice to be fully effective. You cannot visualize your way to mastery without also doing the work. Mental practice prepares your mind, but physical practice develops your skills and creates real-world evidence of your capabilities. This combination of mental and physical practice was perfected by Leonardo da Vinci, perhaps history's greatest example of disciplined excellence across multiple domains. Leonardo didn't become a master painter, inventor, scientist, and philosopher by accident. He developed systematic habits that allowed him to excel in every area he pursued. Leonardo's most powerful habit was what he called continuous observation and documentation. Every day, he would carry a notebook and record his observations about everything he encountered. He would sketch birds in flight to understand aerodynamics. He would dissect corpses to understand human anatomy. He would observe water flowing around rocks to understand fluid dynamics. He would study the way light fell across faces to understand illumination and shadow. But Leonardo didn't just observe passively. He would ask probing questions about everything he saw. Why does water create turbulence around certain shapes but not others? How do birds adjust their wing angles to change direction? What causes some faces to appear more attractive than others? He developed a habit of curiosity that turned every moment into a learning opportunity. Leonardo would then spend time each evening reviewing his daily observations and connecting them to his ongoing projects. He would ask himself how his observations about bird flight might improve his flying machine designs. He would consider how his anatomical studies might make his paintings more realistic. He would explore how his understanding of water flow might inform his engineering projects. This daily habit of observation, documentation, questioning, and synthesis allowed Leonardo to see connections that others missed. His innovations weren't the result of sudden inspiration. They were the result of systematic attention to detail and disciplined thinking over many years. He had developed habits that made genius inevitable rather than accidental. Leonardo's approach reveals the 10th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Excellence is a habit, not an event. Extraordinary results come from ordinary practices performed with extraordinary consistency. But consistency requires energy, and energy requires recovery. One of the biggest mistakes people make in habit transformation is trying to maintain peak performance without adequate rest and renewal. They treat themselves like machines that can run continuously without breaking down. The reality is that sustainable high performance requires rhythmic cycles of effort and recovery. This principle was understood deeply by the ancient Greeks, who recognized that even the gods needed rest. They built regular festivals and ceremonies into their calendar to ensure that periods of intense work were balanced with periods of celebration and renewal. In modern times, this principle has been validated by research on ultradian rhythms, the natural 90-minute cycles of alertness and fatigue that occur throughout the day. High performers who align their most demanding habits with their natural energy peaks and schedule recovery during their natural energy valleys maintain higher levels of performance with less stress and burnout. This rhythmic approach to habits was mastered by one of history's most productive writers, Charles Dickens. Dickens wrote some of the most beloved novels in the English language while also editing magazines, giving public readings, and managing a large household. He maintained this extraordinary output for decades without burning out. How did he do it? Through what he called systematic oscillation. Dickens would write intensively for 3 to 4 hours every morning when his mental energy was highest. But he wouldn't try to write all day. After his morning writing session, he would take long walks through London, often covering 20 to 30 miles while observing the city and its people. These walks weren't just exercise. They were active recovery that stimulated his creativity while allowing his conscious mind to rest. Dickens would often say that his best ideas came to him during these walks, not while he was sitting at his desk trying to force inspiration. Dickens also built seasonal rhythms into his work. He would write intensively during certain months and then take extended breaks for travel and family time. He understood that creativity requires both discipline and freedom, both effort and ease, both focus and play. This rhythmic approach allowed Dickens to maintain his creative output and enthusiasm for writing throughout his entire career. He never experienced the creative blocks or burnout that plague many writers because he had learned to work with his natural energy cycles rather than against them. The 11th fundamental principle of habit transformation is: sustainable performance requires rhythmic recovery. Build rest, play, and renewal into your habit system to maintain long-term effectiveness. Now let's address one of the most challenging aspects of habit transformation: dealing with social pressure and environmental influences that oppose your changes. Your current habits didn't develop in isolation. They were shaped by your family, friends, culture, and environment. When you try to change your habits, you're not just fighting against your own internal resistance, you're also fighting against external pressures to remain the same. This social dimension of habit change is often overlooked, but it's crucial for long-term success. The people around you have unconscious investments in keeping you the same because your changes might challenge their own choices or comfort zones. If you start exercising regularly, your sedentary friends might feel judged. If you start reading instead of watching television, your family might feel abandoned. If you start pursuing ambitious goals, your peers might feel threatened. This doesn't mean the people in your life are intentionally trying to sabotage you. Most of this pressure is unconscious, but it's real, and it can be powerful enough to derail your transformation if you're not prepared for it. The solution is what I call strategic social design, intentionally structuring your social environment to support your new habits rather than undermine them. This involves 3 key strategies: finding habit allies, creating accountability partnerships, and gradually expanding your peer group to include people who model the behaviors you want to adopt. Habit allies are people in your current social circle who support your transformation and want to see you succeed. They might not share your specific goals, but they respect your efforts and encourage your progress. Identify these people and spend more time with them during your transformation period. Accountability partnerships are relationships specifically designed to support habit change. You and your accountability partner commit to checking in with each other regularly about your progress, challenges, and insights. The key is to choose someone who will be honest with you without being judgmental, supportive without being permissive. But the most powerful strategy is gradually expanding your peer group to include people who naturally embody the habits and mindset you want to develop. If you want to become more disciplined, spend time with disciplined people. If you want to become more entrepreneurial, connect with entrepreneurs. If you want to become more creative, surround yourself with creative individuals. This strategy was used brilliantly by one of America's most successful industrialists, Henry Ford. Ford didn't come from a wealthy or educated background. He was a farm boy with limited formal education. But he understood that to achieve extraordinary success, he needed to learn from people who had already achieved what he wanted to accomplish. Ford deliberately sought out relationships with successful businessmen, inventors, and thinkers. He became friends with Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, and John Burroughs. He would take camping trips with these men, not just for recreation, but to absorb their thinking patterns, decision-making processes, and success habits. Ford didn't just admire these men from a distance. He studied how they thought, how they approached problems, how they made decisions, and how they organized their daily lives. He would ask them direct questions about their methods and philosophies. He was essentially reverse engineering success by learning from successful people. This strategic relationship building allowed Ford to accelerate his own development dramatically. Instead of learning through trial and error over decades, he could learn from the accumulated wisdom and experience of multiple successful individuals. He was leveraging their knowledge to shortcut his own learning curve. Ford also understood that he needed to become the type of person who could maintain relationships with highly successful individuals. He developed habits of continuous learning, clear communication, and value creation that made him interesting and useful to the people he wanted to learn from. This is the 12th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Your peer group determines your potential. Surround yourself with people who embody the habits and mindset you want to develop. But what if you don't currently have access to the type of people you want to learn from? In today's connected world, you have unprecedented access to the thinking patterns and habits of successful people through books, podcasts, videos, and online communities. You can create a virtual mentorship relationship with anyone whose ideas and approaches resonate with you. This approach was pioneered by one of history's most self-educated individuals, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin lived in colonial America, far from the centers of learning and sophistication in Europe. But he refused to let his geographic limitations prevent him from accessing the best thinking of his time. Franklin created what he called his Virtual Council of Advisors, a collection of historical and contemporary figures whose wisdom he would study and apply. He would read their writings extensively, imagine conversations with them, and ask himself how they would approach various challenges and decisions. Franklin would literally conduct imaginary conversations with figures like Socrates, Jesus, Isaac Newton, and other great thinkers. He would present them with problems he was facing and imagine how they would respond based on his deep study of their philosophies and methods. This practice allowed Franklin to develop wisdom and perspective far beyond what would have been possible through his direct experience alone. He was able to benefit from the accumulated insights of humanity's greatest thinkers without ever meeting them personally. Franklin also created real intellectual communities wherever he lived. He founded discussion groups, libraries, and organizations that brought together the most thoughtful and ambitious people in his area. He understood that intellectual growth requires interaction with other minds, so he created the social infrastructure necessary for that interaction. This combination of virtual mentorship and real community building allowed Franklin to become one of the most accomplished individuals in American history. He was simultaneously a successful businessman, inventor, writer, diplomat, and political leader. His achievements were made possible by his systematic approach to learning from others and creating environments that supported his growth. The 13th fundamental principle of habit transformation is, you can accelerate your development by learning from the accumulated wisdom of others, both living and dead. Create your own council of advisors and study their thinking patterns and habits. Now let's explore one of the most powerful but least understood aspects of habit transformation: the role of spiritual practices in creating lasting change. When I use the word spiritual, I'm not necessarily referring to religious beliefs, though they can certainly be included. I'm referring to practices that connect you to something larger than your immediate desires and concerns. Spiritual practices, whether they involve meditation, prayer, reflection, time in nature, or service to others, create what psychologists call transcendent motivation. This is motivation that comes from your connection to higher values, deeper purpose, and ultimate meaning, rather than from immediate rewards or the avoidance of immediate pain. Transcendent motivation is remarkably powerful for habit transformation because it provides a source of energy and commitment that doesn't depend on external circumstances or emotional states. When your habits are connected to your spiritual values and sense of purpose, they become expressions of who you are at the deepest level, rather than strategies for getting what you want. This spiritual dimension of habit formation was understood deeply by Marcus Aurelius, whose meditations remain one of the most powerful guides to personal transformation ever written. Aurelius developed daily practices of reflection, gratitude, and philosophical contemplation that connected him to his highest values and deepest sense of purpose. Every morning, Aurelius would spend time contemplating the nature of life, death, virtue, and duty. He would remind himself that his time on earth was limited and precious, which motivated him to use each day wisely. He would reflect on his role as emperor and his responsibility to serve the common good rather than his personal interests. These weren't just intellectual exercises, they were practices that transformed his entire approach to daily life. Because Aurelius connected his habits to his spiritual understanding of virtue and duty, his self-discipline never felt like self-denial. It felt like self-expression. Aurelius writes, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine." This passage reveals how Aurelius used spiritual reflection to transform his habitual responses to difficult people and situations. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, He had trained himself to respond with understanding and compassion. He had literally rewired his emotional habits through spiritual practice. The 14th fundamental principle of habit transformation is: spiritual practices provide transcendent motivation that sustains change even when external circumstances are challenging. Connect your habits to your deepest values and highest purpose. But spiritual practices alone are not enough. They must be combined with practical wisdom and strategic thinking. This integration of spiritual depth and practical effectiveness was demonstrated masterfully by one of history's greatest leaders, George Washington. Washington faced enormous challenges during the Revolutionary War that would have broken most people. His army was constantly outnumbered, undersupplied, and demoralized. He faced repeated military defeats, political opposition, and personal attacks. Many of his advisors urged him to give up or seek a negotiated surrender. But Washington had developed spiritual practices that gave him access to a source of strength and clarity that transcended his immediate circumstances. He would spend time each morning in private prayer and reflection, seeking guidance and strength for the challenges ahead. He would read from spiritual texts that reminded him of the higher purpose he was serving. These practices weren't separate from his military and political strategies. They informed and strengthened his practical decision-making. Because Washington was connected to a sense of divine purpose, he could maintain hope and determination even during the darkest periods of the war. Washington also developed habits of seeking counsel from trusted advisors while ultimately taking personal responsibility for his decisions. He would gather information, consider multiple perspectives, and seek guidance through prayer, but he never avoided the burden of leadership by trying to get others to make his decisions for him. This combination of spiritual grounding and practical responsibility allowed Washington to persevere through challenges that would have defeated someone relying solely on willpower or strategy. His habits weren't just personal disciplines. They were expressions of his commitment to something larger than himself. Washington's example demonstrates that the most powerful habits are those that integrate multiple dimensions of human experience: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. When your habits engage all these dimensions, they become incredibly robust and sustainable. Now, I want to share with you a specific framework for designing and implementing your own habit transformation system. This framework synthesizes all the principles we've discussed into a practical process you can begin using immediately. First, conduct what I call a habit audit. For the next 7 days, carry a notebook or use your phone to track your existing habits without trying to change them. Every time you engage in a habit, positive or negative, record 3 things: what triggered the habit, what the habit was, and what reward you received from it. Don't judge your habits as good or bad during this phase. Simply gather data. You're becoming a scientist studying your own behavior patterns. This awareness alone will begin to weaken the automatic nature of your unwanted habits. After 7 days, review your data and identify the 3 habits that are having the most negative impact on your life, and the 3 habits that would have the most positive impact if you developed them. Don't try to work on more than 3 habits at once. Habit transformation requires focused attention and energy. For each negative habit you want to eliminate, identify the positive intention it's serving, and design a replacement habit that serves the same intention in a healthier way. Remember, replacement is more powerful than resistance. For each positive habit you want to develop, connect it clearly to your values and identity. Ask yourself, what type of person would I be if I consistently practiced this habit? How would this habit express my deepest values? How would this habit contribute to my highest vision for my life? Next, design your environment to support your new habits and discourage your old ones. Make good habits easier and bad habits harder. Remove triggers for unwanted behaviors. Create obvious cues for desired behaviors. Then, establish a daily practice of mental rehearsal. Every night before sleep, spend 10 to 15 minutes visualizing yourself performing your new habits perfectly. Make the visualization detailed, emotional, and compelling. See yourself not just doing the behavior, but being the type of person who naturally engages in that behavior. Create accountability systems that provide both support and gentle pressure. This might involve finding an accountability partner, joining a community of people working on similar changes, or simply tracking your habits visually where you can see your progress. Most importantly, Start small and build gradually. The goal is not immediate perfection but sustainable progress. It's better to meditate for 5 minutes every day than to meditate for an hour once a week. It's better to write 1 paragraph daily than to write for 4 hours once a month. As you implement this system, remember that setbacks are not failures, they're information. When you miss a day or revert to an old pattern, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What was the trigger? What was I trying to accomplish? How can I adjust my system to handle this situation better next time? This learning-oriented approach prevents the shame and self-criticism that often derail habit transformation efforts. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to improve consistently over time. The compound effect of small improvements is truly extraordinary. If you improve by just 1% each day, you'll be 37 times better by the end of a year. If you get 1% worse each day, you'll decline nearly to 0. The difference between these trajectories seems insignificant on any given day, but the long-term results are dramatically different. This mathematical reality of compounding was understood intuitively by one of history's most successful investors, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller didn't become wealthy through spectacular investment wins or lucky breaks. He became wealthy through the systematic application of small advantages over long periods of time. Rockefeller developed habits of extreme frugality, careful analysis, and patient accumulation that seemed insignificant to observers, but compounded into extraordinary wealth over decades. While other businessmen were seeking immediate profits and dramatic successes, Rockefeller was building systems that would generate sustainable advantages. Rockefeller would spend hours analyzing potential investments, considering not just their immediate profitability, but their long-term strategic value. He would negotiate aggressively for small percentage improvements in his deals, understanding that these small margins would compound significantly over time. Most importantly, Rockefeller developed the habit of reinvesting his profits rather than spending them on luxury or consumption. He understood that money invested in productive assets would grow exponentially over time through the power of compound interest. This long-term thinking and systematic approach allowed Rockefeller to build wealth that lasted for generations. He wasn't just getting rich, he was building systems that would continue generating wealth long after he was gone. Rockefeller's approach demonstrates the 15th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Small advantages, consistently applied over time, create extraordinary results through the power of compounding. But compounding works in both directions. Just as positive habits compound into extraordinary success, negative habits compound into extraordinary problems. This is why it's so important to address destructive patterns quickly rather than hoping they'll resolve themselves. Every day you delay breaking a bad habit, that habit becomes more deeply ingrained in your neural pathways and more integrated into your identity. Every day you delay installing a good habit, you miss another opportunity for positive compound growth. The time to begin your transformation is now, not when circumstances become perfect or when you feel completely ready. Conditions will never be ideal, and you will never feel completely prepared. Growth requires stepping into uncertainty and discomfort while learning as you go. Before we go deeper, I want to remind you that this content is part of a growing community of people committed to personal transformation and excellence. If you're finding value in these insights and strategies, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel and join our community of growth-minded individuals who are committed to becoming the best versions of themselves. We regularly share advanced strategies, success stories, and cutting-edge research that can accelerate your development. Now let's explore one of the most sophisticated aspects of habit transformation: the integration of multiple habits into what I call keystone habit systems. Keystone habits are habits that naturally trigger other positive habits and create cascading improvements across multiple areas of your life. For example, a morning exercise habit often becomes a keystone habit because it naturally leads to better eating choices, improved sleep quality, increased energy throughout the day, and enhanced self-confidence. The act of exercising doesn't just improve your physical fitness, it triggers a cascade of other positive behaviors and attitudes. Similarly, a daily reading habit often becomes a keystone habit because it expands your knowledge, improves your communication skills, provides material for interesting conversations, and develops your capacity for sustained concentration. The 20 or 30 minutes you spend reading each day creates benefits that extend far beyond the specific information you absorb. The key to identifying potential keystone habits is to look for behaviors that require multiple positive qualities and naturally reinforce other positive behaviors. Habits that require discipline, planning, consistency, and delayed gratification tend to strengthen these qualities in other areas of your life as well. This keystone effect was brilliantly utilized by one of history's most accomplished polymaths, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt didn't try to develop excellence in politics, writing, exploration, and conservation as separate pursuits. He identified keystone habits that supported all of his diverse interests simultaneously. Roosevelt's most powerful keystone habit was what he called the strenuous life, a commitment to physical vigor and mental toughness that informed everything he did. He would start each day with vigorous physical exercise, regardless of weather or circumstances. This habit developed his physical strength, mental discipline, and emotional resilience simultaneously. But Roosevelt's exercise habit wasn't just about fitness. It was connected to his philosophy that character is developed through confronting and overcoming challenges. His daily physical challenges prepared him for the intellectual, political, and emotional challenges he would face throughout the day. Roosevelt also developed keystone habits around reading and writing. He would read at least one book per week, often while eating meals or traveling. He would carry a notebook everywhere and write down observations, ideas, and insights throughout the day. These habits supported his political career by keeping him informed and articulate, his writing career by providing material and developing his skills, and his conservation work by deepening his understanding of natural sciences. The genius of Roosevelt's approach was that his habits were synergistic rather than compartmentalized. His reading informed his writing. His writing clarified his thinking. His thinking improved his political effectiveness. His political work provided experiences that enriched his writing. Each habit reinforced and amplified the others. This is the 16th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Design keystone habits that create cascading improvements across multiple areas of your life. Look for synergies and connections rather than treating habits as isolated behaviors. But even with perfectly designed keystone habits, you will face periods of low motivation, high stress, and competing demands that challenge your consistency. This is where the concept of habit resilience becomes crucial. Habit resilience is your ability to maintain your essential habits even during challenging periods, and to recover quickly when you do experience setbacks. Building habit resilience requires what I call the three-layer defense system. The first layer is your ideal routine, how you practice your habits when conditions are favorable. The second layer is your minimum viable routine, the reduced version of your habits that you can maintain even during challenging periods. The third layer is your recovery protocol, how you get back on track after missing your habits for several days. Most people only plan for the first layer. They design elaborate routines that work perfectly when they're motivated, healthy, and free from unusual demands. But they have no plan for maintaining momentum when life becomes difficult or chaotic. The result is that any disruption, illness, travel, work crisis, family emergency, completely derails their progress. They go from perfect adherence to complete abandonment, and then struggle to restart because they feel like they've failed and lost their momentum. The three-layer system prevents this all-or-nothing pattern. When conditions become challenging, you automatically drop to your minimum viable routine rather than abandoning your habits entirely. When you miss several days, you follow your recovery protocol rather than starting over from scratch. This resilient approach was mastered by one of history's most consistent performers, the great composer Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach produced an extraordinary volume of high-quality music throughout his life. Despite facing numerous personal and professional challenges, including the deaths of several children, job insecurity, and constant financial pressure, Bach's consistency was made possible by his layered approach to his compositional practice. His ideal routine involved several hours of uninterrupted composition time each day, usually in the early morning when his mind was freshest. But Bach also had minimum viable routines for busy days. He might work on a single musical phrase or harmony exercise for just 15 minutes. When Bach faced major disruptions, moving to a new city, starting a new job, dealing with family crises, He had recovery protocols that helped him rebuild his compositional momentum quickly. He would start with simple exercises and familiar forms before attempting more complex works. He would set very modest daily goals until his rhythm was re-established. This systematic approach to resilience allowed Bach to maintain his creative output throughout decades of ups and downs. He understood that consistency over time was more valuable than perfection in any single period. Bach's approach demonstrates the 17th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Build resilience into your habit system by planning for challenges and creating multiple levels of engagement. Now let's address one of the most important but overlooked aspects of lasting transformation: the integration of your new habits with your existing relationships and responsibilities. Many people successfully change their personal habits, but struggle to maintain those changes when they conflict with the expectations and needs of their family, friends, and colleagues. This integration challenge is particularly acute for people in leadership positions or those with significant caregiving responsibilities. How do you maintain your morning meditation practice when your children need breakfast? How do you preserve your exercise routine when your job demands long hours? How do you continue your learning habits when your spouse feels neglected? The solution requires what I call ecological thinking, understanding that you exist within a complex system of relationships and responsibilities, and your habit changes must be sustainable within that system. This doesn't mean you can't make significant changes. It means you must make changes in a way that honors your commitments to others while still serving your own growth. Ecological thinking involves three key strategies: transparent communication, mutual benefit design, and gradual boundary adjustment. Transparent communication means openly discussing your habit changes with the important people in your life. Explain why these changes matter to you, how they align with your values, and how they might ultimately benefit your relationships and responsibilities. Most resistance comes from misunderstanding or feeling excluded from your growth process. Mutual benefit design means looking for ways to structure your habits so they create value for others as well as yourself. Can your exercise habit involve activities that your family can participate in? Can your reading habit include books that help you be a better parent, partner, or colleague? Can your creative pursuits result in gifts or experiences that benefit others? Gradual boundary adjustment means slowly but consistently protecting the time and energy necessary for your most important habits. This isn't about becoming selfish or neglecting your responsibilities. It's about recognizing that your personal growth ultimately serves everyone who depends on you. This ecological approach was demonstrated beautifully by one of history's most devoted family men and prolific inventors, Thomas Edison. Edison had 6 children and a wife who needed his attention and financial support. Yet he also maintained an incredibly demanding schedule of invention and business development. Edison solved this integration challenge by designing his work habits to include his family rather than exclude them. His home laboratory was attached to his house, so he could be available for family needs while pursuing his inventions. He would often involve his children in simple experiments and observations, sharing his curiosity and teaching them about science. Edison also structured his most intense work periods during times when his family responsibilities were minimal, early mornings and late evenings when his children were sleeping. But he was completely present during family meals and weekend activities, giving his full attention to his wife and children. Most importantly, Edison connected his work habits to his family values. He wasn't pursuing success for ego or fame. He was building financial security for his family and creating inventions that would improve life for future generations. His habits weren't competing with his family commitments. They were expressions of his family commitments. This ecological integration allowed Edison to maintain both his inventive productivity and his family relationships throughout his life. He never had to choose between being a great inventor and being a good father and husband because he had designed his habits to serve both roles simultaneously. Edison's example demonstrates the 18th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Design your habits to integrate with and serve your existing relationships and responsibilities rather than competing with them. But what about habits that require you to step away from toxic relationships or limiting environments? Sometimes growth requires difficult choices about which relationships and situations you're willing to tolerate. Not all ecological integration is possible or desirable. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of personal transformation: the necessity of occasionally choosing your growth over other people's comfort. This doesn't mean becoming callous or selfish. It means recognizing that you cannot live someone else's life or sacrifice your potential to manage someone else's emotions. The key is to make these choices consciously and compassionately rather than reactively or aggressively. When you must establish boundaries that disappoint others, do so with kindness and clarity. Explain your decisions without defending them endlessly. Remain open to feedback while maintaining your commitment to your growth. This balanced approach to boundaries was modeled perfectly by one of history's most compassionate yet determined leaders, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln faced enormous pressure throughout his presidency to abandon his principles in order to please various political factions, military leaders, and even his own cabinet members. Lincoln developed the habit of listening carefully to all perspectives, considering the merits of different arguments, and then making decisions based on his deepest convictions rather than political expediency. He would seek to understand why people disagreed with him. But he wouldn't change his fundamental direction simply to avoid conflict. When Lincoln decided to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, he knew it would cost him political support in border states and create enormous controversy. But he had developed the habit of connecting his decisions to his highest values, rather than his immediate comfort or popularity. Lincoln would explain his decisions clearly and patiently, but he wouldn't endlessly relitigate them once they were made. He understood that leadership sometimes requires making choices that disappoint people who care about you. This principled approach to boundaries allowed Lincoln to maintain his integrity while still building the coalitions necessary to win the Civil War and preserve the Union. He proved that you can be both compassionate and uncompromising when it comes to your core values. Lincoln's example demonstrates the 19th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Compassionate boundaries are essential for protecting the habits and values that matter most to you. Now let's explore the advanced psychology of habit automation. How to make your positive habits so automatic that they require minimal willpower or conscious attention. The ultimate goal of habit transformation is not to rely on discipline forever, but to engineer your life so that positive behaviors become your natural default responses. This automation happens through a process called chunking, your brain's ability to bundle multiple behaviors into single automatic routines. When you first learn to drive a car, every action requires conscious attention. You must think about pressing the clutch, shifting gears, checking mirrors, steering, and braking simultaneously. But after sufficient practice, all these individual behaviors become chunked into an automatic driving routine. You can drive while having a conversation, listening to music, or thinking about other topics, because your brain has automated the complex sequence of behaviors required for safe driving. The same chunking process can be applied to any sequence of positive behaviors. Your morning routine, exercise routine, work routine, and evening routine can all become automated through sufficient repetition and conscious design. The key to successful chunking is to link your desired behaviors to existing automatic triggers. Instead of relying on motivation or remembering to do your new habit, you connect it to something you already do automatically. For example, if you want to develop a gratitude practice, you might link it to your existing habit of drinking coffee each morning. Every time you take your first sip of coffee, you automatically think of 3 things you're grateful for. The coffee becomes the trigger that automatically initiates the gratitude practice. If you want to develop a reading habit, you might link it to your existing habit of eating lunch. Every time you sit down for lunch, you automatically open a book and read while you eat. The lunch routine becomes the trigger that automatically initiates the reading practice. This trigger linking approach was used masterfully by one of history's most disciplined military leaders, Julius Caesar. Caesar developed automatic routines for every aspect of his military campaigns, from personal preparation to troop management to strategic decision-making. Caesar's morning routine was so automatic that his soldiers could predict his exact schedule and location at any time of day. He would wake at the same time, spend a fixed period reviewing maps and reports, meet with his officers in a predetermined sequence, and tour his troops along established routes. But Caesar's automation wasn't rigid or inflexible. He had also developed automatic routines for adapting to changing circumstances. When scouts reported enemy movements, Caesar had predetermined protocols for gathering additional intelligence, adjusting troop positions, and communicating with his commanders. This combination of routine automation and adaptive automation allowed Caesar to make complex decisions quickly while maintaining consistent standards of preparation and execution. His habits had become so automatic that he could focus his conscious attention on strategic thinking rather than operational details. Caesar's approach demonstrates the 20th fundamental principle of habit transformation. Automation frees your conscious mind to focus on higher-level thinking and creativity. But automation must be balanced with flexibility and awareness. Completely automatic habits can become rigid and prevent you from adapting to changing circumstances or growing beyond your current level. The goal is conscious automation, habits that run automatically most of the time but can be adjusted when necessary. This conscious automation requires periodic review and refinement of your habit systems. Every few months, you should evaluate whether your current habits are still serving your highest priorities and values. As you grow and change, your habits should evolve as well. Some habits that were perfect for an earlier stage of your development might become limiting factors as you advance. An exercise routine that was challenging when you started might become too easy after months of practice. A morning routine that worked when you were single might need adjustment after you get married or have children. The key is to view your habits as living systems that grow and adapt with you, rather than static rules that must be followed forever. This evolutionary approach prevents your habits from becoming prisons that constrain your continued growth. This adaptive approach to habits was demonstrated brilliantly by one of history's most innovative entrepreneurs, Henry Ford. Ford didn't just create the automobile industry. He repeatedly reinvented his own habits and methods as his company, and the market evolved. In the early days of Ford Motor Company, Ford personally worked on the factory floor, assembling cars alongside his workers. He developed habits of hands-on experimentation, direct observation, and continuous tinkering that were perfect for a small, innovative startup. But as the company grew, Ford recognized that his habits needed to evolve. He couldn't continue doing everything himself while also building a large organization. He developed new habits around delegation, system design, and strategic thinking that were appropriate for his role as the leader of a major corporation. When the market shifted and competitors began offering more variety and luxury, Ford again adapted his habits. He began spending more time studying consumer preferences, visiting other companies to learn new methods, and involving others in product development decisions. Ford's willingness to evolve his habits allowed him to remain successful through multiple decades of dramatic change in his industry and society. He proved that the most successful people are not those with the most rigid disciplines, but those with the most adaptive disciplines. Ford's example demonstrates the 21st fundamental principle of habit transformation. Regularly review and evolve your habits to ensure they continue serving your growth in changing circumstances. As we near the end of our journey together, I want to address the ultimate purpose of habit transformation, not just to improve your productivity or achieve your goals, but to become fully yourself. Champions, your mind has been forged a little stronger today, but the real test isn't what you learned, it's what you do with it. Take action, dominate your day, and remember, we're not just building better thoughts, we're forging unstoppable lives. The forge doesn't stop, and neither do you. If this episode hit you where it counts, subscribe to Mental Forge Academy and join the Brotherhood of Champions who refuse to settle for ordinary. Go transform, strike while the mind is hot.